I was sitting in my car outside Central Texas University, engine running, waiting for Megan to finish her evening literature seminar. The engagement ring I'd been carrying around for 3 months felt heavier in my pocket than usual. Night was supposed to be the night. I had reservations at the Capitol Grill, her favorite flowers in the back seat, and a speech I'd practiced in the mirror for weeks. The spring Austin air was warm through my open window, and everything felt perfect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That's when I saw them. Megan walked out of the English building, but she wasn't alone. Professor Tom Bradley had his hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the faculty parking lot. They moved together with an intimacy that made my stomach drop. When they reached his silver BMW, he pulled her close and kissed her. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, a real kiss. The kind of kiss that said they'd done this before, many times. Before I watched my fiancée of 2 years climb into another man's car like it was the most natural thing in the world. They drove past me, so close I could see Megan laughing at something he said, her hand resting on his thigh. She never even looked in my direction. The engagement ring felt like it was burning a hole through my jeans. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate on anything at Digital Dynamics. My coworkers kept asking if I was feeling all right, but how? Do you explain that you discovered your entire relationship was a lie? I kept replaying the scene in my head, wondering how long this had been going on. How many times had Megan told me she was staying late to study when she was actually with him? Ryan, my roommate and best friend since college, found me staring blankly at my computer screen around lunchtime. He took one look at my face and immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. Dude, you look like someone ran over your dog. What happened? I told him everything. About seeing Megan with Professor Bradley, about the engagement ring. I'd been carrying around about how stupid I felt for not seeing the signs earlier. Ryan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. That piece of garbage, he finally said.
How long do you think this has
been going on? I don't know. Months, maybe? She's been taking his advanced seminars since last fall. All those late study sessions, weekend research projects at the library. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. God, I'm such an idiot. No, man. You trusted someone you loved. That doesn't make you an idiot. Makes her a cheating piece of work. But Ryan's words didn't make me feel any better. I couldn't stop thinking about all the red flags I'd missed. The way she'd started dressing up more for school, how she'd become protective of her phone, always keeping it face down when we were together. The new perfume she claimed was a gift. From her study group. The late-night texts, she said, were from classmates, but that made her smile in a way that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. That evening, I decided I needed to know the truth. I drove to Megan's apartment, near campus, using the spare key she'd given me months ago. The place was empty, but I wasn't there to confront her. I was there to gather evidence. If I was going to end this relationship, I wanted to be absolutely certain about what I was walking away from. Her laptop was open on the kitchen counter, still logged into her email. I know snooping is wrong, but at that point, I was beyond caring about privacy. What I found made my blood run cold. Email after email between Megan and Tom Bradley, going back 8 months. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future together. Romantic getaways to his cabin in the hill country. Discussions about her transferring to another university where they could be together openly. And most shocking of all, an email from just 2 days ago with the subject line, "Our wedding plans." They were planning to elope. The email chain revealed everything. Tom had convinced Megan that their love was too pure and powerful to be contained by conventional academic boundaries. He'd painted their relationship as some grand romantic story, like something out of the Victorian literature they both studied. He was divorced, he told her, and free to marry again. They would drive to Las Vegas next weekend, get married in a simple ceremony, and start their new life together, away from the judgment of people who couldn't understand their connection. Reading those emails felt like being punched in the stomach repeatedly, but what really destroyed me was Megan's responses. She wrote about me like I was some annoying obligation she couldn't wait to escape. "Jake is sweet," she'd written, "but he's so ordinary. doesn't understand art or literature or anything that matters to me. With you, I feel alive for the first time. Ordinary. That word hit harder than any of the others. I printed out the emails, took screenshots of everything, and left her apartment feeling numb. The engagement ring was still in my pocket, but now it felt like evidence of my own foolishness rather than a symbol of our future together. When I got home, Ryan took one look at the papers in my hand and opened 2 beers without asking if I wanted one. "So what's the plan?" he asked after I'd shown him everything. "I don't know. Confront her? Let her elope and just disappear from her life? Show up at their wedding and object like some rom-com cliché? Or," Ryan said slowly, "you could dig a little deeper into Professor Tom Bradley. Something about this whole thing smells fishy to me." He was right. The emails were passionate but vague about Tom's personal life. For someone planning to marry a graduate student, he seemed surprisingly secretive about his background. Megan knew he was divorced, knew he had a house in Westlake, knew he'd published several well-regarded novels. But she didn't seem to know much about his family, his previous marriage, or really anything concrete about his life outside the university. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm thinking that guys who prey on their students usually have a pattern, and guys who have patterns usually have secrets." Ryan pulled out his laptop. "Let's do some research on Professor Tom Bradley and see what we can find." What we discovered over the next few hours changed everything. Tom Bradley wasn't divorced. According to public records, he was very much married, had been for 5 years. His wife was listed as Catherine Bradley, maiden name Connor, Katie Connor. The name seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it until Ryan pulled up her social media profiles. My blood turned to ice. Katie Connor Bradley was my sister Katie, who lived in downtown Austin. My sister Katie, who worked as an interior designer and had been married for 5 years to a man she'd always referred to simply as Tom during family gatherings. My sister Katie, who I'd somehow never connected to Professor Tom Bradley because she'd taken his last name and I'd never really paid attention to her husband's profession. Megan wasn't just having an affair with a married man. She was having an affair with my brother-in-law. She was planning to elope with my sister's husband, and she had no idea. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. This time, I'd been worried about losing Megan to another man, when that other man was already part of my family. Katie had brought Tom to Christmas dinner, to birthday parties, to family barbecues. I'd shaken his hand, made small talk about his work, even complimented his books. He'd sat at our family table, eating my mother's cooking, while secretly seducing my fiancée. "This is insane," Ryan whispered, staring at Katie's wedding photos on his screen. "Your sister's been married to this guy for 5 years?" 5 years, I confirmed, feeling sick. "And he's been lying to Megan about being divorced. She has no idea she's about to break up my family." But as the shock wore off, something else took its place. A cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. Tom Bradley wasn't just cheating on my sister, he was manipulating my fiancée, lying to both women, and destroying 2 relationships for his own selfish desires. He thought he was so clever, keeping his 2 worlds separate. He had no idea that those worlds were about to collide in a way he'd never seen coming. I looked at Ryan and I could see the same realization dawning in his eyes. "We have to tell Katie," I said. "And we have to stop that elopement," Ryan added. For the first time since seeing Megan kiss Tom Bradley in the university parking lot, I felt something other than despair. I felt purpose. Tom Bradley had made one crucial mistake. In his web of lies, he'd chosen to mess with the wrong family. And now, he was about to discover that some secrets are impossible to keep buried, especially when they involve people who love each other enough to fight back. The next few days were going to change everything for all of us. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't going to be the victim of someone else's betrayal. I was going to be the one holding all the cards. Telling Katie was going to be the hardest conversation of my life. My sister had always been the golden child in our family, the one who seemed to have everything figured out. While I was struggling through college, changing majors 3 times, Katie had graduated summa cum laude with her design degree, and immediately launched a successful career. When she met Tom 5 years ago, our parents practically threw a celebration. Finally, Katie had found a man worthy of her intelligence and ambition. I'd always felt a little intimidated by their relationship, if I'm being honest. They seemed so sophisticated together, discussing literature and art at family gatherings. While I made small talk about sports and work, Tom would quote poetry to Katie, and she'd light up in a way that made their connection seem almost magical. Now I realized that what I'd mistaken for intellectual compatibility was actually Tom's practiced routine for seducing intelligent women. I called Katie Saturday morning, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Jake, what a nice surprise. I was just thinking about you yesterday. How's Megan doing with her graduate classes?" The innocent question hit me like a slap. Katie had no idea that her husband was planning to abandon her for my fiancée in less than a week. "Katie, we need to talk. It's in person. It's important." "Oh." Her tone shifted immediately. "Is everything okay? You sound strange. Just meet me at Bean there on campus in an hour. And Katie, don't tell Tom where you're going." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Jake, you're scaring me. What's going on? I'll explain everything when I see you. Just promise me you won't mention this." Call to Tom. After she agreed, I spent the next hour rehearsing what I was going to say. How do you explain that the woman her husband is planning to run away with is someone she's met at family dinners, someone she's asked about wedding planning and future children? Katie was already at Bean there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She looked beautiful as always, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing the kind of effortlessly elegant outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But I could see the worry in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "Okay," she said. "The moment I sat down, you're freaking me out. What's so urgent that you had to drag me out on a Saturday morning?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the first email between Megan and Tom. Katie read it once, then again, her face growing paler with each word. "I don't understand," she whispered. "This is some kind of mistake, right? This can't be my Tom." "It is, Katie. I'm so sorry." I showed her more emails, the photos I'd taken of them together, the wedding plans they'd made. With each piece of evidence, Katie seemed to shrink further into herself. When I finished, she sat in complete silence for nearly 5 minutes, staring at the table. 5 years, she finally said, her voice barely audible. "We've been married for 5 years. We just celebrated our anniversary last month. He took me to that little bed and breakfast in Fredericksburg, the one where we had our honeymoon. He told me he loved me." "Katie, I'm so sorry." "No. I know this is devastating, but there's more you need to know." Plan. How Tom had convinced Megan he was divorced. How they were planning to drive to Las Vegas next weekend. Katie listened without interrupting, but I could see her hands trembling. "She has no idea he's married to me," Katie said finally. "Megan doesn't know." "No, Tom's kept his 2 lives completely separate, till now." Katie stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her coffee cup. "I need to go home. I need to look through his things, see what else he's been hiding from me." "Katie, wait. We should do this together. You shouldn't be alone right now." But she was already heading for the door, moving with the kind of determined energy that meant she wasn't going to be stopped. I followed her out to the parking lot, where she turned to face me with an expression I'd never seen before. Katie had always been composed, controlled, the type of person who thought through every decision carefully. But now she looked dangerous. "I want to see everything," she said. "Every email, every photo, every lie he's told both of us. And then I want to figure out how we're going to make him pay for this. The drive to Katie's condo in downtown Austin gave me time to think about what we were walking into. Tom was supposed to be at the university all day, working on a research project, which meant we'd have the place to ourselves. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Katie used her key with shaking hands, and we stepped into the home she'd shared with Tom for 3 years. The condo was exactly what you'd expect from a successful academic and an interior designer. Everything was perfectly coordinated, from the leather-bound books lining the shelves to the abstract art on the walls. It looked like something out of a magazine, beautiful but somehow cold. Now I wondered how much of their life together had been just as carefully staged. Katie headed straight for Tom's home office, a room I'd never been allowed to enter during family visits. She tried the door and found it locked. "He's never locked this before," she said, her voice tight with anger. "He said it was just to keep his papers organized, that I was welcome any time." Ryan, who had insisted on coming with us for moral support, produced a credit card from his wallet. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the door lock. Katie nodded, and within seconds Ryan had the door open. The three of us stepped inside, and what we found was like discovering a secret compartment in someone's life. The office was divided into 2 distinct sections. One side looked like what you'd expect from a literature professor: academic journals, student papers, research materials. But the other side was something else entirely. There was a bulletin board covered with photos of young women, all of them clearly students. Some of the photos looked like they'd been taken without the subject's knowledge, candid shots of women walking across campus or studying in the library. Katie walked over to the bulletin board, her face growing paler with each photo she examined. "These are all his students," she whispered. "Look at the dates on the back, Jake. Some of these go back years, way before he met Megan." I turned over one of the photos and saw a date from 3 years ago, along with a name written in Tom's handwriting: Sarah M., promising candidate. Another photo was dated 2 years ago: Jennifer L., very responsive to guidance. Promising. Candidate for what? Ryan asked, but we all knew the answer. We kept searching and found a locked filing cabinet. This time Katie found the key herself, hidden in a fake book on the shelf. Inside were folders, each labeled with a woman's name. Each folder contained photos, printed emails, and what looked like psychological profiles written in Tom's neat handwriting. The folder labeled Megan C. was thick with material going back 8 months. Tom had documented everything about their relationship: her vulnerabilities, her insecurities about not being intellectual enough, her desire to be seen as sophisticated. He'd studied her like a research project, carefully crafting his approach to maximize his chances of success. But it was the folder labeled Next Targets that made my blood run cold. It contained photos and basic information about 5 other graduate students, including detailed notes about their personal lives, their academic struggles, and their relationship status. Tom Bradley wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a predator who had turned seducing his students into a systematic operation. Katie sank into Tom's desk chair, holding the Next Targets folder with shaking hands. "How did I not know?" she asked. "How could I live with this man for 5 years and have no idea what he really was?" "Because he's a master manipulator," I said. "Look at how he's managed to keep Megan and you completely separate. He's been living double lives for years, probably long before he even met you." Ryan was examining Tom's computer, which had been left unlocked. "Guys, you need to see this," he called from across the room. On the computer screen was Tom's email, but not the account he'd been using to communicate with Megan. This was a different account, one that revealed the true scope of his deception. There were conversations with at least a dozen different women. Over the past 5 years, all following the same pattern, Tom would identify a vulnerable student, gradually build a relationship with her, convince her that their connection was special and unique, and then either have a brief affair before moving on, or, in some cases, convince the woman to transfer schools or drop out entirely. Megan wasn't special to Tom Bradley. She was just the latest in a long line of victims. "We have to stop him," Katie said, standing up from the desk chair with renewed determination. "Not just for us, but for all these women. And for the ones he hasn't targeted yet." "What are you thinking?" I asked. Katie smiled, and for the first time since I'd shown her those emails, she looked like herself again. It's a composed, brilliant woman who had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "I'm thinking that Tom Bradley has made his career by being smarter than everyone around him. But he's about to discover that there are some things more powerful than intelligence, like family loyalty, and a woman who's really, truly angry." She opened Tom's laptop and began typing rapidly. "What are you doing?" Ryan asked. "Setting a trap," Katie replied. "Tom thinks he's been so clever, keeping his 2 worlds separate. But what if those worlds suddenly collided in a very public, very embarrassing way? What if his colleagues, his students, and his administration all learned the truth about Professor Tom Bradley at exactly the same time?" I watched my sister work, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like hope. Tom Bradley had spent years thinking he was untouchable, that he was too smart and too careful to ever face consequences for his actions. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the people he was hurting. And now, those people were about to show him just how wrong he'd been. Katie's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Tom had scheduled a faculty meeting for Monday morning, where he was supposed to present his latest research proposal to the English department. The meeting would include Dean Harrison, all the senior professors, and several graduate student representatives. It was the perfect audience for what Katie had in mind. Working through the weekend, we crafted a presentation that looked exactly like Tom's usual academic work. The title slide read, "Romantic Dynamics in Academic Settings," a case study in modern manipulation techniques. To anyone glancing at the agenda, it would seem like another dry academic paper. But the content would reveal the truth about Tom's systematic seduction of his students, complete with his own documented evidence. Katie had found Tom's presentation remote in his desk drawer, the same one he used for all his lectures. On Sunday night, while Tom was supposedly at the university library working late, Katie replaced his actual presentation file with our modified version. The file names were identical, so Tom would never suspect anything until it was too late. Meanwhile, I had my own role to play. Megan still had no idea that I knew about her affair, and I needed to keep it that way until the perfect moment. She'd been acting strange all week, jumpy and secretive, constantly checking her phone. When she asked if we could postpone our usual Sunday dinner date because she had extra studying to do, I knew she was probably meeting Tom to finalize their elopement plans. "Of course, babe," I said, forcing a smile. "You work so hard. I'm proud of you." The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but it was necessary. Megan smiled back, the same sweet smile that had made me fall in love with her 2 years ago. Now it just reminded me of how icily she'd been deceiving me. Ryan spent the weekend doing reconnaissance, following Tom's movements and documenting his activities. What we discovered was even more disturbing than we'd initially thought. Tom wasn't just planning to elope with Megan. He'd been systematically draining the joint bank account he shared with Katie, transferring money to a separate account that Katie knew nothing about. He'd also been selling items from their condo, valuable art pieces and electronics, claiming to Katie that he was decluttering their space. "He's been planning this for months," Ryan reported. "This isn't some spontaneous romantic gesture. He's been methodically preparing to disappear with Megan and leave Katie with nothing." The depth of Tom's betrayal was staggering. This wasn't just an affair that had gotten out of hand. This was calculated theft, emotional manipulation, and fraud, all wrapped up in the guise of academic romance. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable rain, as if the weather itself was reflecting the storm that was about to break over Central Texas University. Katie and I positioned ourselves in the hallway outside the conference room where Tom's presentation was scheduled to take place. Through the glass doors, we could see the faculty members filing in, coffee cups in hand, looking like they were settling in for another routine academic meeting. Tom arrived 5 minutes early, looking confident and relaxed in his usual tweed jacket and perfectly knotted tie. He carried his laptop bag and wore the expression of a man who believed he was in complete control of his world. Katie tensed beside me as we watched him set up his presentation equipment, completely unaware that his entire life was about to implode. "Are you ready for this?" I whispered to Katie. "I've been ready for this my entire marriage," she replied, her voice steady and cold. At exactly 9 o'clock, Dean Harrison called the meeting to order. Through the glass, we could see Tom standing at the front of the room, clicking his remote to begin his presentation. The title slide appeared on the screen, and several faculty members leaned forward with interest. Tom had a reputation for innovative research approaches, so they were expecting something engaging. What they got instead was a detailed breakdown of Tom's predatory behavior, complete with his own written notes and photographic evidence. The first slide after the title page showed a timeline of Tom's relationships with students over the past 5 years. The second slide displayed excerpts from his psychological profiles of potential targets. The third slide showed photographs from his bulletin board, along with his handwritten notes about which students were promising candidates. Reaction in the room was immediate and electric. Dean Harrison stood up so quickly that he knocked over his coffee cup. Several faculty members began talking at once, their voices rising in shock and outrage. Tom frantically clicked his remote, trying to advance past the incriminating slides, but each new page only revealed more evidence of his systematic abuse of his position. When the slide showing his correspondence with Megan appeared, complete with their elopement plans and his lies about being divorced, Tom finally understood what was happening. His face went completely white, and he spun around to look at the door, where Katie and I were standing. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Fear. Katie pushed open the conference room door and walked in with the calm confidence of someone who knew they held all the power. Tom's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she approached the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Katie said, addressing the room with the same poise she used when presenting to her design clients. "I'm Catherine Bradley, Professor Bradley's wife. I thought you should know that everything you're seeing on that screen is real. These are documents I found in my husband's home office. Evidence of systematic predatory behavior that has been going on for years under your noses." Dean Harrison found his voice first. "Professor Bradley, is this true? Have you been engaging in inappropriate relationships with your students?" Tom looked around the room desperately, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Several of the graduate student representatives were taking photos of the presentation with their phones. And Tom seemed to realize that this moment was being documented and would soon be shared far beyond this conference room. "This is a misunderstanding," Tom finally stammered. "These documents are taken out of context. My wife is clearly having some kind of breakdown and she's misinterpreted my academic research." Katie smiled, an expression so cold it could have frozen the rain outside. "Academic research," she repeated. "Is that what you call convincing a graduate student to elope with you next weekend? Is that what you call stealing $15,000 from our joint bank account to fund your new life?" The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Professor Williams, the department's senior faculty member, stood up and pointed an accusatory finger at Tom. "Tom, I mentored you. I recommended you for tenure. I trusted you with my own graduate students. If even half of this is true, you've betrayed everything this institution stands for." Tom's composure finally cracked completely. His face flushed red, and his hands began shaking as he realized that his academic career, his marriage, and his carefully constructed reputation were all collapsing simultaneously. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising desperately. "Academic relationships are complicated. The boundaries aren't always clear. These women pursued me as much as I pursued them." "Really?" Katie said, pulling out her phone. "Because I have recordings of phone conversations where you specifically discuss how to identify vulnerable students and exploit their insecurities. Would you like me to play those for everyone?" The threat of audio evidence was the final blow. Tom grabbed his laptop and pushed past Katie, heading for the door. But Dean Harrison's voice stopped him before he could escape. "Professor Bradley, you are suspended from this university effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises, and you are not to contact any students or faculty members pending a full investigation. Furthermore, I will be reporting this matter to the police and to the state education board. As Tom was led away by campus security, his academic career officially over, I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with sadness. Justice was being served, but it couldn't undo the damage he'd caused to so many people. Katie walked over to where I was standing in the doorway, her expression calm but exhausted. "Phase 1 complete," she said quietly, "and we need to deal with Megan." I nodded, knowing that the hardest conversation was still ahead of me. Megan was probably sitting in her apartment right now, planning what to wear to her Vegas wedding, completely unaware that her sophisticated older lover had just been exposed as a fraud and a predator. She was about to learn that the man she thought she loved didn't exist, that the future she'd dreamed of was built on lies. But first, there was something else we needed to take care of. Tom's other victims deserved to know the truth about what had happened to them. Women in those folders, the students he'd manipulated and discarded, needed to understand that they weren't alone and that what had happened to them wasn't their fault. Katie looked at the presentation still glowing on the conference room screen, then back at me. "Ready for phase 2? She asked. I thought about Megan, about the conversation that would end our relationship and shatter her illusions about Tom. Bradley. I thought about the other women who deserved justice, and about Tom himself. Was probably calling lawyers and trying to figure out how to salvage his ruined life. "Let's finish this," I said. The news of Tom's suspension spread through campus like wildfire. By Tuesday morning, every student in the English department knew about the faculty meeting. And by Wednesday, the story had reached the local news. A reporter from the Austin American-Statesman called it a shocking case of academic misconduct that has rocked the university community. The headline read, "Professor Exposed in Student Seduction Scandal." I hadn't spoken to Megan since before the faculty meeting, but I knew she had to have heard about Tom's downfall by now. Her phone had been going straight to voicemail for 2 days, and she hadn't shown up to any of her classes. Ryan suggested that she might have fled town, but I had a feeling she was holed up somewhere, trying to process the fact that her entire relationship with Tom had been a carefully orchestrated lie. Katie, meanwhile, had transformed from the devastated wife I'd comforted over the weekend into something resembling a warrior. She'd hired a lawyer, filed for divorce, and was working with the university's legal team to ensure that Tom faced criminal charges for his theft and fraud. She'd also been in contact with several of the women from Tom's files, helping them understand that they weren't alone in what they'd experienced. "Jennifer wants to press charges," Katie told me over coffee at Bean there on Wednesday morning. She kept a journal during her relationship with Tom 2 years ago, and it documents everything. The psychological manipulation, the lies he told her about his marriage, the way he convinced her to transfer schools to protect their relationship. "What happened to her?" I asked. "She moved to Dallas, dropped out of graduate school, and spent a year in therapy trying to figure out why she'd thrown away academic career for a man who suddenly stopped returning her calls. She thought it was her fault, that she'd misunderstood the nature of their relationship. The pattern was always the same. Tom would identify a vulnerable student, usually someone who was struggling academically or personally. He'd offer extra help, private tutoring sessions, special attention to their work. Gradually, the relationship would become more personal, more intimate. He'd make them feel special, chosen, intellectually superior to their peers. Then he'd create a crisis that required them to choose between him and their academic career, their family, or their previous relationships. Most of the women chose Tom, at least initially. But once they'd made that choice, once they'd isolated themselves from their support systems, Tom would begin to lose interest. He'd become critical of their work, dismissive of their emotions, unavailable when they needed him most. Eventually, he'd end the relationship, usually by simply disappearing from their lives without explanation. The women were left confused, heartbroken, and often academically or financially devastated. Most of them blamed themselves, convinced that they'd somehow failed to live up to Tom's expectations. None of them realized that their experience was part of a calculated pattern that Tom had never intended for any of these relationships to last. "He's a psychological vampire," Katie said grimly. "He feeds off the process of seduction and manipulation. Actual relationships bore him once. He's conquered his target. I thought about Megan and wondered where she fit into this pattern. Had Tom already started losing interest in her? Was the elopement plan just another way to manipulate her, to make her burn her bridges with me and her family, before he inevitably discarded her? On Thursday morning, I finally got a text from Megan. We need to talk. Meet me at Zilker Park, the Rose Garden, 2 p.m. I arrived at the park early, choosing a bench with a clear view of the walking paths. The spring weather was beautiful, warm and sunny, the kind of day that should have filled me with optimism. Instead, I felt like I was preparing for a funeral. Megan appeared at exactly 2 o'clock, walking slowly along the path that led to the Rose Garden. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was limp and unwashed. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she was wearing the same clothes she'd had on the last time I'd seen her. She sat down on the bench beside me, but didn't look at me directly. I know that you know, she said quietly, about Tom, about the affair, about the elopement. I kept my voice steady, but I could feel anger building in my chest. About everything. She finally turned to face me, and I was shocked by how broken she looked. I saw the news coverage. I read the articles. I know what he really is, do you? I asked. Because I'm not sure you understand the full scope of what Tom Bradley was doing. I told her about the files, about the other women, about the systematic way Tom had been preying on students for years. With each revelation, Megan seemed to shrink further into herself. He told me I was different, she whispered. He said what we had was special, that he'd never felt this way about anyone before. I told that to all of them, Megan. You were. Just the latest in a long line of victims. She flinched at the word victims, but didn't argue. I thought I loved him, she said. I was ready to leave everything behind for him. My degree, my friends, my family. You. And now I don't know what's real anymore. Was any of it real? Do you ever care about me at all, or was I just another project for him? It could have been cruel in that moment. I could have listed all the ways she'd hurt me, all the lies she'd told, all the times she'd looked me in the eye and lied about where she was going or who she was with. But looking at her broken expression, I realized that Megan was as much a victim of Tom's manipulation as I was. I think Tom Bradley is incapable of caring about anyone except himself, I said. But that doesn't excuse what you did to me. You were planning to leave me without explanation, to disappear from my life, and marry another man. Even if Tom had been everything he claimed to be, you still would have been willing to destroy our relationship without giving me a chance to understand what was wrong. Megan started crying again, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to find words. I was so unhappy, Jake. I felt like I was suffocating in our relationship. Tom made me feel intelligent and sophisticated and special. With you, I felt ordinary. There was that word again. Ordinary. It still stung, but somehow, it hurt less than it had before. Maybe ordinary isn't the worst thing to be, I said. Maybe ordinary means honest and reliable and actually caring about the people you claim to love. I did love you, Megan said desperately. I do love you. I just got confused, and Tom made me believe that what we had wasn't enough. I stood up from the bench, looking down at the woman I'd planned to marry just a week ago. She looked small and lost. Nothing like the confident graduate student who'd captured my heart 2 years earlier. The engagement is off, Megan. I think you know that. She nodded, not looking up at me. I need you to move out of the apartment by the end of the week. I'll stay with Ryan until you're gone. Jake, please. Can't we try to work through this? I'll do anything to make it right. Some things can't be fixed, Megan. Trust is like a vase. Once it's broken, you can glue it back together, but it's never the same. It's always fragile, always showing the cracks. I started to walk away, then turned back for one final thing I needed to say. For what it's worth, I hope you get the help you need. Tom Bradley didn't just steal money from my sister and manipulate his students. He stole 2 years of your life and convinced you to throw away your integrity for a fantasy. You deserve better than that, even if I can't be the one to give it to you. As I walked away from the Rose Garden, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The relationship I'd thought was leading to marriage was over, but the weight of uncertainty and betrayal was finally lifting from my shoulders. I knew who I was dealing with now. The lies were out in the open, and I could finally start moving forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Katie. Tom's been arrested. Fraud charges, plus the university is pursuing criminal charges for the sexual misconduct. His lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office says they have enough evidence to take this to trial. I smiled grimly as I read the message. Tom Bradley had spent years thinking he was untouchable, that he was too smart and too careful to face consequences for his actions. He'd manipulated and discarded women with impunity, stolen money from his wife, and used his position of authority to exploit vulnerable students. But his luck had finally run out. The house of cards he'd built through lies and manipulation was collapsing. And this time, there was no clever scheme that could save him. He was about to learn that actions have consequences, and that some debts eventually come due. Justice was finally being served, but it felt hollow compared to what we'd all lost along the way. Tom Bradley had damaged so many lives, broken so many relationships, destroyed so much trust. The criminal charges were just the beginning of what would be a long process of healing for everyone he'd hurt. But at least now, finally, the truth was out in the open. Sometimes, that's where healing begins. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment in the trendy East Austin neighborhood, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The place was smaller than the apartment I'd shared with Megan, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in years. Clean lines, minimal furniture, and most importantly, no memories of betrayal lurking in the corners.
Katie knocked on
my door at exactly 7 o'clock, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of genuine smile I hadn't seen from her in months. The divorce had been finalized the week before, and she was finally starting to look like herself again. Celebrating? I asked, gesturing to the wine. Actually, yes. I got some news today that I think you'll appreciate. She settled into my couch and poured 2 glasses of wine while I waited for her to continue. Tom's sentencing hearing was this morning. Less 3 years in state prison, plus 5 years probation. He'll also have to pay restitution to all the women he defrauded, including me. I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with something that might have been pity. Tom Bradley had gone from being a respected professor with a comfortable life to being a convicted felon. His academic career was over, his marriage was destroyed, and his reputation was in ruins. The man who had once seemed so untouchable was now just another cautionary tale. What about the women he hurt? I asked. Most of them are doing well. Jennifer finished her master's degree at UT Dallas and got accepted to a PhD program at Rice. Sarah started her own consulting business. Even the ones who are still struggling seem to be finding ways to move forward now that they understand what really happened to them. Katie paused, swirling her wine thoughtfully. The therapist I've been seeing says that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a victim is realizing they weren't the only one. It helps break the spell of thinking it was somehow their fault. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. So much had changed in 6 months. Katie had thrown herself into her work and was more successful than ever, taking on high-profile clients and expanding her business. I'd gotten a promotion at Digital Dynamics and was leading a team of developers on a project that actually excited me for the first time in years. What about Megan? Katie asked eventually. Have you heard anything? I nodded.
No.
She transferred to graduate school at University of Houston.
Saturday.
Started over with a new advisor, new research focus. Ryan ran into her at a coffee shop last month and said she looked good, healthier somehow. Are you okay with that? Her moving on? I considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, the thought of Megan rebuilding her life without me would have been devastating. Now, it just felt like the natural conclusion to a chapter that had needed to end. Yeah, I am. She made some terrible choices, but she was manipulated by someone who is very good at it. She deserves a chance to figure out who she really is without Tom's influence. And what about you? Any thoughts about dating again? I laughed, but it wasn't bitter anymore. I'm actually enjoying being single for the first time in years. I forgot how much I like my own company. Katie smiled and raised her glass. To new beginnings. 2 new beginnings, I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. As we drank, I thought about everything that had brought us to this moment. The night I discovered Megan's affair felt like a lifetime ago, but I could still remember the shock of seeing her kiss Tom in the university parking lot. At the time, I'd thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I realized it had been the beginning of something much better. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been revealing. It had shown me what I was really made of, what Katie was capable of when she was pushed to her limits, and how strong our family bond really was. Tom Bradley had tried to destroy our lives, but in the end, he'd only made us stronger. I have something else to tell you, Katie said, breaking into my thoughts. I've been seeing someone. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Tell me about him. His name is Marcus. He's a contractor who's been working on one of my clients' homes. Funny and completely uninterested in discussing literature or philosophy. He builds things with his hands and thinks, my job is fascinating without needing to prove how intellectual he is. Sounds perfect for you. The best part is that he's exactly what he appears to be. No hidden agendas, no secret lives, no manipulative. Game's just a good man who treats me well and makes me laugh. I felt genuinely happy for my sister. After everything Tom had put her through, she deserved someone who would appreciate her without trying to control or manipulate her. I'd like to meet him, I said, next week. A family barbecue at Mom and Dad's house. You can interrogate him properly then.
Ow!
We finished our wine as the city lights began to twinkle outside my windows. Austin was beautiful at night, full of promise and possibility. I'd lived here for 5 years, but I was finally starting to feel like I truly belonged. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. New girl at work asked about you. Interested in an introduction? I showed the message to Katie, who grinned mischievously. Well, are you interested? Maybe, I said, surprising myself. Yeah, actually, maybe I am. 6 months ago, I'd been planning to propose to a woman who was secretly planning to leave me for another man. I'd thought I knew what my future looked like, but I'd been completely wrong. The life I'd been building had been constructed on lies and false promises. Now, for the first time in years, I had no idea what came next. My future was completely unwritten, full of possibilities I couldn't even imagine yet. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Tom Bradley had tried to destroy my family, steal my fiancée, and leave chaos in his wake. But in the end, all he'd really done was set us free. Free from his manipulation, free from relationships built on deception, free to discover who we really were when we weren't being controlled by someone else's agenda. As Katie got ready to leave, she hugged me tightly at the door. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up. For fighting for the truth. For being the brother I could count on when everything fell apart. Stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights, thinking about second chances and new beginnings. Tom Bradley was in prison, paying for his crimes. Megan was rebuilding her life in Houston. Katie was happy with a man who deserved her. And I was finally ready to find out what came next. The future stretched out before me, uncertain but full of potential. For the first time in months, I couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen, if this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.